Hello everyone, and welcome to the lunch date with Sharia Farmer. I am doing something a little bit different for the month of October. This is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and everyone who knows me closely knows that this is a very important time of the year for me. I get an opportunity to educate and to hand over some information that I sometimes will have inside of me or use when I'm working with clients that could probably benefit us all in terms of healthy and unhealthy relationships. And so what I'm going to try to do over the next 4 weeks is really try to focus in on one area of domestic violence that I felt over the last year, specifically while working with clients and people who I've met in my life in regards to relationships. One of the main areas that I see is that a lot of times what we recognize as domestic violence is sometimes the escalated form of violence that is physical. And what I want to do is kind of start from the beginning in terms of looking for signs and warning signs surrounding emotional abuse and other forms of non-physical abuse. And so over the next 4 weeks, what I will be doing is trying my best to stick to the task because this subject is so important to me that I sometimes will get into a discussion over different examples and different things that will be talking about a number of areas of abuse, but I really want to try to focus specifically this month on emotional abuse and really non-violent or non-physical abuse that might relate to the beginning processes and also the continuing way that a person is struggling with the possibilities of leaving or struggling with recognizing or developing the skills to actually say that possibly this relationship is unhealthy and I need to make different decisions within it. So what I'm going to do over the next 2 weeks is actually talk about signs and different things that you may notice about emotional abuse. But where I wanted to start before I even get into that was to actually kind of give some general information, and I really tried my best to not make this too formal. And also I'm going to try my best to give you an opportunity to have some contact information at the end if you wanted to ask a question within the videos comments section, or if you wanted to ask something anonymous and I can see if I can help. What I would like to do really is to first give some statistics about domestic violence here in the US. 1 in every 4 women in the US have been assaulted by an intimate partner. 30 to 50% of all women murdered are killed by an intimate partner. 1,500 women are killed by the partners annually. And yes, I know right now people are saying, well, why is she only mentioning women? I do believe that men are abused as well. However, the focus for the statistics that we're talking about today are related to women because they make up the larger amount of those affected physically as well in terms of life-threatening forms of abuse. They make up the larger percentage. And so some of the statistics, although uncomfortable for us to hear, and although I truly believe that anyone can be abusive or be abused, we are really going to focus only for the statistics on women and domestic violence as it relates to women. Also, as most of the people who are in shelters, in family shelters, women who are in shelters are actually escaping some form of domestic violence. Hi, we are going to start with a little information, and I'm going to do a little bit of myths and facts about domestic violence, which will start off as some foundation information for us, and then what we'll do is move to making it more specific to emotional abuse. And this week we're going to work specifically on the warning signs of emotional abuse, and we're going to go into the rest of those warning signs next week. After those 2 weeks, what we'll do is actually develop an understanding of healthy and unhealthy relationships. And then finally, what I would like to do on the last week of the lunch date is to actually talk about the importance of developing and maintaining healthy relationships and identifying just general signs of having a healthy relationship and developing boundaries within them. So it's going to be a lot of information over 2 weeks. I'm going to try, or excuse me, over 4 weeks. I'm going to try my best to keep it condensed as well as informative, so that way you can benefit from it by will recommend that you take the breaks that you need emotionally, because some of the information may ring true to you, or you might start in your mind developing this sense of a checklist of, oh, that's happening in my relationship, or that has happened in the past, or I can recognize it in so-and-so. And what I want us to do is to get the information, but I also want us to benefit from it, to be able to help ourselves and others. So take the breaks that you need to be able to process the information. And in those cases where the information gets too heavy, it's okay to ask for support or ask for help from someone else to get you to decide if this is something that you're struggling within your relationship or within yourself. Because I also would like for us to do a self-inventory about how we're treating other people in relationships as well. So all that to say, let's get started with the definition, or excuse me, some understanding of domestic violence in an overview, and then I'm going to get more specific to emotional abuse specifically. So what I want us to remember, for the United States, 1 in 4 women report that they have been physically abused by either their husband or boyfriend. Women of all races have equally been vulnerable to levels of violence and domestic violence. When I say that, I really want us to understand that this can affect anyone regardless of race or class. And then lastly, the second leading cause of death for pregnant women is actually at the hands of an intimate partner. So it becomes important for us to recognize, because although we're going to be talking about emotional abuse, what I want us to do is see the importance of identifying some of these signs before things may even escalate to the point of violence. However, what I don't want you to think is that a person has to have all these signs for them to escalate to violence. The reality is that there are some individuals who will report in their relationships that the violence started immediately. And in those cases, they may not have even seen some of the signs that we're going to talk about as it relates to emotional abuse and what I like to call non-physical forms of abuse. All right, so let's talk about some myths and some facts about domestic violence. Domestic violence and family and violence only occurs in working or poor families. That is a myth. Domestic violence and family violence happens in all communities, from all social and cultural groupings. That's important to remember, like I said earlier, because we cannot start and or identify only one group as struggling with this, because the truth of the matter is, if we look at the statistic I said earlier, 1 in 4 women, it didn't indicate 1 in 4 white women, or 1 in 4 black women, or 1 in 4 Latina women. It indicated specifically 1 in 4 American women, which means that race was not an indicator of whether or not a person would experience violence, and or economic status wasn't either. And so we can't always think that the person who's getting hurt only looks like one element or one single representation of what we know about domestic violence. Violent men cannot control themselves. Their behaviors are out of control. This too is not true. If anyone knows anything about control and violence, the reality is domestic violence is actually an area where the person has control over how they respond in different settings. And I have worked with women who would, if you recognize their abusers, you would say they were charismatic, loving, caring, but when the door closed, they were an entirely different person. So the truth is that the person may be out of control and behind closed doors, but they ultimately know how to control themselves in other settings, which indicates that there is some element of this being about self-control related to controlling another human being, not being out of control or just angry. Let's see which other one. I have a bunch of them on the paper, so I'm not going to try to read all of them. Domestic violence only happens where there is unemployment and poverty. We already know that's not true, as we said earlier. Domestic violence is rarely spoken about, and it is a private family matter. The reality is that domestic violence is a crime. The truth of the matter is that we have, in the last few years, increased our discussions around domestic violence, but for a very long time, in most cultures, domestic violence has been a family secret, and or something that was only dealt with by the family and or those people who were exposed to it. Excuse me. Let's see, what's another one? Alcohol and stress are the blame for domestic violence. Alcohol and stress are not an excuse for domestic violence. It only acts as an excuse. The reality is that if a person wants to commit domestic violence, they themselves do not have to be under the influence and or have a substance abuse issue. That's important to note, because a lot of times we'll hear people say he only acts that way when he's drinking, or he's only acting that way when he's high. That might be when the violence escalates, or there's some kind of level of control that escalates. However, there may be warning signs even prior that this individual is capable of harming you in terms of domestic violence. And I want us to remember that, because as I'm going over the next 2 weeks with warning signs related to emotional abuse, I want us to remember that these are some warning signs for all of us as we enter into relationships, as we begin to develop relationships, as we maintain relationships and or restructure the relationships we have. Because the truth is that sometimes we're not aware that something can be a warning sign, because we also might consider it something that we enjoy and or look as part of gender roles. Oh, that's him just being a man. Oh, that's him just doing this. Or that's her having to be too sensitive. That, like, really looking at how we see gender roles and identifying how we can benefit from actually looking at individuals with the same level of empathy and not just control. All right, so that was a few myths and facts. Now, also every year I usually do a training for clinicians surrounding how to work with domestic violence. So I occasionally will slip in and out of my therapy hat, also trainer hat, related to clinicals. So forgive me, I'm trying to make sure I stay focused and maintain information that will benefit anyone around understanding emotional abuse. So I am going to jump to some basics about the definition of domestic violence. So domestic violence is an abuse of power perpetrated mainly, but not only, by men against women in relationships or after separation. It occurs when one partner attempts to physically and or psychologically dominate and control the other person. The reality is, as I said earlier, is that when we think of domestic violence, we usually are thinking about the physical. For the purpose of this year's training and the next 4 weeks, we're going to talk about emotional abuse. And the reason I started with emotional abuse is not because I think that one element is more important than the other, is that sometimes when recognizing physical abuse, it's sometimes easier, and I'm cautioned to say that it's easier in the sense that we can identify it because someone physically hit us, or someone pinched us, or someone pushed us or punched us. There's things that we can identify that actively are seen as wrong in anyone's eye, so it becomes easy for us to say, yes, he physically abused me. However, when it comes to emotional abuse, what we're going to learn, especially when it comes to intimidation and or name calling, sometimes we may joke or be sarcastic about certain things, and it actually is a form of control to be able to get the person to think low about themselves or their capabilities. So I say that because I don't want to discount the importance of physical violence, but I want to increase our knowledge in an area that I think is beneficial, especially because I work with a lot of young women and also older women, actually, that I've worked with recently in this past year or two that have very poor understanding of emotional abuse, and therefore they participate in relationships that are unhealthy for a much longer time, and or the unhealthy signs of emotional abuse escalates to physical abuse. So I say that because I want us to understand why I chose to start with emotional abuse and not physical. Okay, so now let's get started talking about emotional abuse. And the reason why I wanted to start here is because the reality is that there are two types of onset of domestic violence. One is immediate, and when I say domestic violence, what we think naturally of is the physical violence. And so I have to caution myself because I keep saying that, but I want to make sure we are aware that there are two types. There is the slow progressive, and there is the immediate, which is the immediate may be someone who will physically hit you as soon as you're entering into the relationships, who will physically push you or try to show you signs of violence very early in the relationship. And then there's the other, which is slow progressive. And being slow and progressive indicates that sometimes it may feel like these things just came out of nowhere, and that I am really surprised or shocked that the person that I've been spending the last year, maybe 6 months with, has done these things to me. So I say that because a lot of times what people do in relationships is they think about or recall how it started or where this could have happened for me to have gotten so far off track when it comes to a healthy or unhealthy relationship. And so I started with emotional abuse because I really noticed that a lot of times it's not that it was very slowly in progression. It was that some of the signs and warning signs that I may have missed were actually indicators that things were going to go down a road that could be unhealthy. So verbal and physical restraint is very important within the start of any relationship. And so usually what we are our best self, right? And in our best self, we are trying our hardest not to make the other person believe that we would be capable of hurting them as they may have been hurt in the past. But what you'll start to notice very subtly is a sense of isolation, a sense of moving you away from those you care about, or having a strain on the relationship with those you care about, and really starting to identify ways to separate you from what they might indicate as unhealthy or bad friends. Or they may start off with a simple joke like birds of a feather flock together, and then the next statement they're calling your girlfriend's whore or hoe, and they're saying their thoughts and they're easy. And the reality is that if I first started off by saying birds of a feather flock together, and then I called your friends names, I'm actually not openly calling you a name, but I'm actually calling you a name by calling your friends ones. So be very mindful of, with emotional abuse, it isn't blatant. It isn't always blatant, because we're going to talk about some other signs that actually are very blatant and obvious for us to see. And using that same of birds of a feather flock together, what you'll also start to notice is they'll do that with your family, or your caregivers, or the people who might have taken care of you or supported you most of your life. So they'll say, you're just as angry as your mom. That's why everything gets out of control. You just talk just like your mom talks too much. I can tell why your mom's a single mother, right? So they're using things against you that they know about who you are, or even know about your family. And then now ultimately they're talking bad about your family, and then also, and without saying they're talking about you. But what they're doing is they're comparing you and telling you that you have to do something different to be different than your parent and or friends. Because it may not be a mother, it may be you're angry like your dad, or you and your brothers don't have any idea how to treat women, right? So they may say things that indicate that you don't know enough about relationships, therefore they are the authority and they have to be the ones to help you to know better or to learn better. And what we learn during emotional abuse is that it actually works on an element of our esteem. It works on an element of reminding us about the negatives that we may have experienced based off of our own past relationships. And we have to be very mindful that when this person is using these things, that we're aware of what's true in terms of needing support and help, and what is about them trying to control me and have to come to them as the authority on relationships. So isolation being one of the major forms. Another form is financial abuse. And last year I noticed that there was a lot of focus on financial abuse, so I'm not going to spend too much time on it. But this is where they might try to develop ways for you not to control your money, not to have access to money, not to have access to resources that you would need to take care of yourself on your own. And then so we know physical abuse, we know emotional abuse, we know that was financial abuse. There's so many different elements of power and control that we have to begin by understanding emotional control and also understanding what healthy and unhealthy relationships look like. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read off several signs of emotional abuse, and you can actually at this point kind of think to yourself, what, if any of these things, have I experienced? Am I the person initiating making a person feel bad about their past or their history? Am I initiating having a person believe that they are basically nothing without me? Am I experiencing this? So what I really would like you to do is a self-inventory and or an opportunity to just gather the information to see how you can help other people. All right, so let's get started on some basic signs of emotional abuse. Excuse me, I have to get it in my phone because I wrote a whole long list, and the list went on and on and on. So I really, I want you guys to forgive me because I really do take this subject extremely serious, because I just know that we can do better and we can love better, and I believe that all of us deserve a healthy relationship. So some of the things that I came up with: they humiliate you or put you down or make fun of you in front of your friends. So they try to make you feel bad about yourself. And what I notice is that depending on the generation, sarcasm or jokes become really easy and an excuse, and then it also looks like I'm not really attacking you, I'm just making a joke. And you know, they say that a jest is somewhat usually true, so usually jokes have some truth to them. And the reality is, if I'm trying to humiliate you or make you feel bad about yourself, what about me needs you to feel bad about yourself for me to be able to control you? They demean or degrade your opinion, your ideas, or your suggestions. So they say things like, you never know what you want to eat. And I know that we joke around with this one a lot as in relationships, where it's like, I asked you 1,000,000 times and you say nothing. But not only do you just say nothing, but then they make you feel stupid or feel like you have a lack of information or that you don't know what you're talking about. So for example, if you're talking about the elections, which I definitely am not going to get into, and you have a strong opinion on, say, Hillary or Trump, what they do is they make you feel like what your information or opinion is less than important and or doesn't make sense because it's not something they gave you to think. So for example, you might say, I really don't like Donald Trump because he's a racist. Can you see that that's real? And then they tell you, well, no, he's not a racist, he's an actual this and that, and he believes in making America great. And you have a very articulate point about where he has openly said and done racist and sexist things, and yet this person still belittles you for having a difference of opinion. They use teasing. So again, going back to sarcasm, I'm sarcastic and I know this, so occasionally I have to catch myself because it's not intended to hurt someone, but it can easily hurt and belittle a person and make them question how they feel about themselves. So teasing someone isn't always a good thing. So I had a young lady that I was working with who boyfriend would tease her about getting too drunk, and in those teasing he would do things like laugh at her in front of her friends, tell her that she's a drunk and that she's a lush and this and that. And then eventually that did escalate to even more violence because he eventually started to push her around when she was drinking. Like I said earlier, I believe I said something regarding being too sensitive. When a person is making the sarcasm or the jokes and you actually try to speak up for yourself or say, I don't like
when you make those jokes in front of my friends or family, and then they tell you things like you're being too sensitive. The reality is that it's not that you're being too sensitive, it's that you're setting a boundary that they don't like, and therefore, just like the sarcasm or the teasing, they're using that as a method to put you back in line. They try to control you or treat you like a child. So they do things like tell you you don't know what you're talking about, you're not smart enough, like literally similar to putting you down, but yet they're actually treating you like a child and telling you what to do, telling you how to do it, always giving you directions when you might in yourself already know how to do things. So if I were you, I would do it this way. You don't know what you're doing, give it to me, right? So almost like treating you as if you don't understand information and or don't have the correct information on how to do something. See how the list starts to get a little blurry and really easy to overlook as normal parts of relationships? This is where it becomes extremely important to navigate this checklist or self-inventory for yourself, because like I said earlier, I know I'm sarcastic. However, I also know that in being sarcastic, I have to turn it down to make sure that other people's feelings aren't hurt. And so I'm very mindful of that, as well as empathetic to when a person is expressing that I've hurt them. They continuously correct you. Constantly correcting you in front of others is a sign that I've also noticed. So I had a set of friends that we would hang out with who I enjoyed both of them as a couple. However, what I always noticed was that the woman would always find the need to correct her husband, and when she did it, it almost felt like a child being chastised, and it felt as if he was going to get in trouble if he didn't get it right. And so when a person is making you, having to correct you, but also making you feel like that child again, where they're going to discipline you if you don't get it right, or yell at you, or feel like you might get yelled at if it's not done right. You feel like you need to ask permission when you're making decisions or doing something. So it's almost like you have to check in. So this one may come in time, right? So if I don't feel good about what I'm saying, if I'm always put down for my decision, if I'm always looked at as not having enough information or not being smart enough, all of a sudden I might subconsciously start to believe that, and then go to that person for the answer. Oh, what do you think about such and such? And not in a way that you actually are trying to weigh it against your own information, but basically asking that person for permission or guidance in an area that they've tried to put you down in or made you feel really poorly about yourself in. Okay, so here's another one. This came from some of the people that I've been working with over the past year. When I was making up the list, I did speak to some previous clients, and one of them wanted me to make the point that they felt belittled and constantly belittled their dreams or their accomplishment. So this young lady specifically had graduated with her, I believe she graduated with her doctorate or master's, I'm not sure. Forgive me. If you're watching, do forgive me, because she specifically asked me to mention this one. But your accomplishments and your dreams. And so she was graduating from for her master's or her doctorate program, and she had been doing really well, possibly had gotten a job offer, and the young man that she was dating was constantly telling her that she was not going to get employed, that this was a waste of time, that she spent too much time in school, that the level of debt she had is not going to pay off with all this education. And what she kept feeling was that she was wasting her time, so she kept trying to get through school quickly, or kept trying to get out of it so that way she can get to the other side. And then she felt as if she was not going to be able to satisfy him or herself as it relates to how much she spent in school. And so she almost felt like her dream of being a doctor or getting her doctorate wasn't taken serious, and it was more about what she was going to lose versus what she was gaining. And so one of the things that she felt this started to do was actually make her self-image and her identity start to change around even how she was thinking about school and the importance of school. It became more about, oh my God, what's this debt ratio to what I'm going to make, and not about the fact that she would be the first one in her family. It is a doctorate, excuse me. She would be the first one in her family to get her doctorate, and that would be an accomplishment that has no price tag. And so being able to identify that now, and I'm actually extremely proud of her, and being able to have separated from that relationship and realizing her own esteem was more important in how she saw herself. But that's a method that might have been used that you don't even recognize, because your hopes and your dreams should be celebrated and supported by those who love you and those who care about you. And even when they might sound bizarre to a person or might sound off track according to how they do things, someone who loves you is going to support you and help you to make healthy decisions around your dreams. Very different than telling you your dreams are a waste of time, or you're never going to get it, or what's the point of getting it. Things that actually make you feel bad about having dreams. And so I caution us to listen to those around us who don't believe in our dreams. They try to make you feel as though they are always right and you are wrong. So you can never have, so I want to actually take this one for myself. In a relationship I had prior to my husband, I had someone who constantly would argue with me. And I'm anyone who knows me when it comes to relationships or dating, I actually am not an arguer. I believe you make your point, I make my point, and then we either decide on something that we come to an agreement, and or we move on from it because we're going to agree to disagree. And what I found was that this person was constantly trying to get me to have an argument with them, or to try to express anger that had nothing to do with the subject. And what I would ultimately start doing is feeling bad about even having discussions with him, because I was afraid that they would escalate into somewhere I didn't want to go, and somehow we would be right back into this vote about who's right or wrong versus expressing our opinions. So really being able to recognize that allowed me to even identify that this isn't a healthy relationship. And although he might have good qualities over here, the ability to not understand my boundary around arguing and anger becomes extremely important in terms of how he and I will navigate other issues in relationship. So therefore, as you know, obviously I married someone else. Therefore, it wasn't healthy for me to maintain that relationship and to even maintain a friendship with that person. All right, so I'm going to do about 4 more, and then we're going to save the remaining ones for next week. They give you disapproving and your mama kind of a look. So when I was thinking of that look your mom used to give you from across the room when you were little and you knew you did something wrong, and you kind of like either straightened yourself up or you went closer to your mom because you knew that something would happen if you didn't. There are people who have never been physically abused by their partner or their intimate partner. However, they may have not acknowledged that they understand a discomfort, a look that they give them, and the frequency of that look is about controlling you and getting you in line in certain settings outside of the home or even within the home. That gives you that look that says, get over here, or you're out of line. And that look is totally different when you're a child and your mom has to make sure that you're not pulling the racks down in the store, or clothing rack down in the store, or your mom's trying to make sure you're safe and don't cross the street. That look is totally different than one that would be in your relationship. So being aware of if that person is constantly trying to give you either disapproving looks, or you guys know that look I'm talking about, when your mama used to give you like, get over here or you're going to get in trouble, that look of discipline. And that becomes extremely important as we think about the concept of escalated violence, because eventually if the look isn't enough, then what? And so I'm going to stop there, because I do feel like I have a whole lot on this list, and I want to give each of them an opportunity to breathe and get some examples related to them. I really am grateful that you joined me on the first of 4 different lunch dates surrounding emotional abuse. I hope that you got some information today. Remember, this first 2 weeks is just about information. I'm actually going to make sure to always leave resources at the end of the video and or in the actual write-up with the saved video, so that you can make sure that yourself or anyone else that you know or love is safe and protected. I am a true believer that all of our wellness, including our emotional, spiritual, intellectual, physical, and goodness, I can't even all of our wellness is as important as any other parts of who we are. And I really want us to benefit from this. So if you have any questions, or if you have any input or examples that you would like me to make sure I get across, you can inbox me, and or I am going to actually leave an email or an anonymous way for you to give me feedback if you want it to maintain or stay private. I want you all to stay blessed, be well, and I will talk to you next week.